With the big fire years in 2009 and 2010 here in British Columbia, I was invited here to kind of give you guys an idea of what might be in store post-fire for your wild lands. I'm going to tell you a tale in 3 parts, and we're going to start out with some general fire and invasion ecology. To give you an idea of the patterns that have been found globally post-fire in terms of invasibility. Then we're going to go into some of my research and its surprising results in the boreal forest. And then we'll look a little bit at some post-fire management strategies that have been successful in other places. So we have increasing vulnerability with our changing climate to both fire and invasion. So simultaneously, both of these trends are increasing. We know the IPCC models predict that, especially in Canada and the northern United States, that we're going to see more favorable temperatures, especially in the winter, and longer growing seasons to foster greater richness and abundance of invasive plant species. Simultaneously, we have these increases in our fire frequency, our fire severity, and fire extent occurring all over North America. And this is providing further opportunity for invasive plants to succeed because of all those reasons that you great students just said. All right, pay attention to this part because you're going to get quizzed. Basics of invasive plant and fire ecology. One of the major questions is how will different severities impact the invasibility of a site? And in general, high severity burns are more susceptible to invasion than low severity burns in general. And there's a huge volume of literature in all sorts of different biomes across the world that demonstrate. So burn age and invasibility. One of the questions is how will invasions change with time elapsed since burn? And so in general, there's a large volume of literature in the northwest North America coniferous forests that demonstrate a pretty predictable pattern. After fire, the invasibility of the site increases rapidly. And then after about 5 years, it starts to decline and taper off as the canopy starts to close in successional processes. So for land managers in Alaska, after those 2 huge fire years, much like your two fire years, 2009, 2010, land managers were panicked by this trend of increasing invasive plants, increasing disturbance, and increasing wildfire. And people were afraid that the perfect storm was brewing for backcountry spread, that 5 sites of invasions that had escaped the human footprint was going to increase to who knows how many spots off of the human. So it's a pretty exciting result. You can look at the pictures up there. You can see how densely the liverworts and mosses cover the surface in those high severity cores. And then down at the lower part, you see the low severity cores where the surface is a little bit too porous for those mosses to establish. And so you can just see the difference there. Not what you would expect based on the literature. And then, so we were scratching our heads after the greenhouse study, and we were like, we got to go back and survey and increase our sample size and increase maybe the number of times that we were finding invasives in the burned areas. So we did the most comprehensive study ever done in burned areas in the state of Alaska. We surveyed every half a kilometer and every road that intersected any burn in the whole state of Alaska and surveyed the vegetation, looked for native and non-native correlations, soil correlations, and to our shock, we found the same pattern that we had found in the greenhouse. That overall, you can see the gradient of burn severities on the bottom there and the percent of our transects that were infested. Our lightly burned and moderately burned sites were more frequently invaded than those sites that were highly burned, high severity burns, or unburned at all. So that is a pretty shocking result. And the moral of that story is that know your system more than knowing the trends. I just wanted to note that there were species-specific differences in the burn severities that different species were responding to. The Melaleucus alba, that strong taproot that loves mineral soils, it was found more often in high-severity burns. So, quiz. At what point do burns start to become less invasible in terms of time elapsed since burn? After about 5 years, in most coniferous systems in the northwest North America, they start to taper off. Good. We found surprising results again in that chronosequence of sites, especially in the high severity sites. We were finding increased invasive plant success in the greenhouse in those soils that were from older burns than from younger burns. Pretty interesting result. And you would think, oh, that's a legacy of the greenhouse. You don't have the canopy closure, of course. But when you think about the successional trajectories after fire in black spruce systems, a high severity fire, as you can see in that picture, tends to develop into broadleaf deciduous forest first. And so you have that closed canopy, which would limit light in a high severity fire available to an invasive plant. Whereas a low severity burn, they tend to be stand self-replacing fires with an open canopy, open black spruce type of situation, which would allow more light for an invasive plant to establish. So really curious results. We're definitely going to have to look more into this in the future. But also in the field, when we did our field survey, we had the highest abundance, richness, in our chronosequence burn sites. And low severity sites were more frequently burned. 66% of our low severity sites that were older had non-native plants present, whereas only 30% of our high severity sites did. So that was also an interesting result. So it appears that in black spruce boreal forest that we might be wise to monitor and control invasive plants, not just in those recent burns, but in those older burns as well, and keep looking for those low severity burn situations. They're not immune to invasion. And then when considering spatial scale, those burn site characteristics were completely outweighed by regional differences in soil, mostly, and propagill pressure. The soil pH in one particular region of our study was driving the invasive plant abundance and the incidence of movement into burn areas. So as you go about managing invasive plants post-fire, think about soil pH and soil characteristics that might make you want to focus on a certain area that might be region that might be particularly vulnerable. This is a summary slide. I'm not going to read it. So overall, the lessons of my research is that the literature is a really important starting point for understanding post-fire invasions, but knowing your system is essential because the patterns might not necessarily be the same in your particular system. The prevention or mitigation increases with the increasing invasion scenario, and the probability of your success at mitigating the problem decreases. And so if given a fixed budget, prioritizing those burns and those populations that best fit your resources is going to be your best approach here. So, and it sounds like because only a few people have worked on cheatgrass, that scenario 4 might not need to be dealt with this coming season, which is a good thing. So your take-home messages for the 2011 growing season. First, from just the general ecology, those trends are really useful for setting out your initial management strategies, especially if you don't have much research or monitoring to back up your management plans for this coming summer in those burned areas. So know those invasions. You've all been quizzed on them, and it sounds like you passed with an A. The second, from my own research in the boreal forest, is that it is really good to know those invasion trends post-fire, but even better is to know your own system and know how fire's acting in your own system and what invaders you might have there that would interact with those severities and soil properties. And finally, for the post-fire management section, take-home message is know what you've got before the fire hits, because then you can start your planning much sooner than trying to scramble as your invaders are rapidly expanding their territory. And know what resources are available. Those two resources, Center for Invasive Plant Management and the Fire Effects System resources, are really great places to start.